Realm presents Machina. Episode 7.
14 months ago. It was after 9 o'clock at night, and the DevLok offices were quiet except for the constant hiss of the air conditioning, keeping the desert heat at bay. Smits was cleaning out his office, with nobody but Pseudo for company. Trey had pushed Smits off into a smaller office when he first had to cut down his work time, and as his diagnosis got worse, the offices had just gotten smaller and smaller. This last one was tiny, and he had long since stopped bothering to put up posters or photos. There were no screens in it, but he kept his protective glasses on to keep from getting a headache from the hallway fluorescence. Pseudo sat near the door, watching him with glowing eyes. Smits had rescued Pseudo from a recycling bin at Boston Dynamics, modified the basic big dog unit with a more realistic headpiece and a tail, and programmed in some sounds and more natural movements. Now it cocked its head to watch him and thumped its tail as if hoping for a walk. He had no intention of leaving the dog behind to be junked. Pseudo was coming with him, wherever he ended up. Now, Smits scooped up the contents of his drawers, dumping it all into a cardboard box. He wasn't keeping any of it, he just didn't believe in leaving his crap around for other people to deal with. Worn wrist bracers, empty medication bottles, dark glasses that had failed to protect his eyes, a collection of mice and pads and supports and stands and different brands of stylus, and all the things that were supposed to substitute for working tendons and cartilage. He should have known his time was limited when they hadn't even provided momentary relief anymore. Pseudo gave a warning bark, and Smits looked up. Lakshmi stood in the doorway, her lips pressed together into a thin line. It was almost an expression of disapproval, but he knew her too well by now. She said, "Sorry, I got a security alert that someone was down here. It alerts on people who have every right to be here all the time, but I just thought I should check." "No problem." Trey had disabled Smits' access about 10 seconds after reading his resignation letter and dismissing him with a fake friendly clap on the back and an insincere, "That's too bad" speech. Even with his eye and hand pain, Smits could have destroyed Trey's security in less than a minute. But he hadn't bothered. He hadn't thought anyone would be here but the night guards, who knew he was just cleaning out his office. He really hadn't expected to run into Lakshmi, and he honestly didn't know if he was glad to see her or not. "You're working late?" She shrugged a little. "Just trying to catch up." Her gaze flicked around the office and its pointedly absent workstation. "I guess it's easier for you, this late, with so many screens shut down." Smits let out a breath. Nothing about this was going to be easy. Lakshmi winced. "I'm sorry, I can't imagine. I'm just sorry." He rolled his stress ball collection into the box. "I am too," he said, and ignored the sudden thickness in his throat. He hadn't chosen this time because most of the screens in the offices and hallways would be dark. That was just a side benefit. He'd really wanted to avoid a chorus of sympathy, pity, and goodbyes, and he wanted to avoid Lakshmi. Not because he didn't want to see her, because seeing her hurt almost as much as typing. He'd had a thing for her since meeting her in college, at first because she was beautiful. Then, as he'd gotten to know her, her sharp intelligence had sealed the deal. Nothing had ever happened between them. She was only a few years older than him, but it had seemed like a bad idea to ask the teaching assistant for a date. Since then, it had never seemed the right time. "This is such a waste," she said, the words coming reluctantly, as if she knew this was the last thing he needed to hear, but she couldn't help herself. "Having you work compliance is a waste," Smits said. Dismissing Lakshmi's ability was another one of Trey's ego-driven mistakes. "This is just equipment failure, and it's not like I'm being abandoned on a desert island to die." Lakshmi's grimace was wry. "Not that I think Trey is above that." She wasn't wrong. Smits didn't let his reaction show, though his jaw tightened. Trey had made it clear that Smits had been tossed on the discard pile. If he couldn't do the job, then he was useless to Trey, and therefore useless to everybody. Smits just said, "Luckily, no islands out here." "If there were, I know you could just swim ashore," Lakshmi said. Then she winced again and rubbed her temple. "Somehow, I thought that sentence would be funny and consoling, and it was not." Smits had to smile. Lakshmi was one of those coders who was great at talking to computers, but people, not so much. "I understood what you meant." Lakshmi smiled ruefully. "It's going to be harder around here without you. I know your job wasn't to be a buffer between Trey and Stephanie, but you did help." The last thing he wanted to think about was what his personal disaster might mean to the already tense web of relationships in DevLok's management. Trey and Stephanie were heading for a major confrontation. Never mind that the future survival of humankind might require them to restrain the worst parts of their personalities. Stephanie was becoming more assertive, more confident, but in a lot of ways, Trey was still the same code-stealing opportunist that he had been in college. Back then, Smits had just assumed Trey was still growing up and would get over it, and he had enjoyed working with him, valued his skills, his sense of humor. Their group had had a great synergy. But Trey's position in DevLok had given him power over people, and that had exacerbated his character flaws, to the point where Smits wondered if the Trey who had been his buddy had ever really existed. Stephanie and Trey needed a buffer. Or possibly Stephanie needed a buffer and Trey needed a punch in the stomach. Whatever. There was nothing Smits could do about it now. "Stephanie can handle herself." He hefted the box and adjusted his dark glasses. "Come on, Pseudo." Lakshmi gave the dog a bemused look as it trotted after Smits, but didn't comment as she followed. They walked together through the empty corridors, Smits' special glasses keeping the fluorescent lights at bay, the air conditioning chill on his skin. Lakshmi started to speak, then stopped herself with a snort. She said, "I was about to make a suggestion, but I know you're probably sick of the words. But what about—" Smits sighed. "Also, you could try. I know Stephanie means well." "She does. She really didn't want you to leave." Stephanie had made that clear, offering help with every possible solution up to holistic herbs and aromatherapy and chanting. "I always thought we'd get to Mars together," she had said when he told her his decision, and he believed her. Lakshmi said, "Besides everything, you help her deal with Trey. Without you here, he makes her so angry, and it's deliberate, obviously." With Smits losing his ability to code, Trey's ego had expanded to take up every available molecule of oxygen in the building. Stephanie's got every right to be angry, but she's letting her anger get in her head, letting it control her. "You sound like a Jedi Master. Maybe that can be your new job." Then she groaned. "That was also supposed to be funny and consoling. I'm sorry. I'm making this worse. I should just—" "No, you're fine." She was brilliant and beautiful, and if he said anything more, he would say too much. Lakshmi belonged to a world he couldn't live in anymore. He couldn't ask her to take a chance on him, and dragging out his departure like this wouldn't help. He turned to her and said, "Thank you, Lakshmi. It was a pleasure working with you." "You too," she said, and smiled sadly. The heavy glass doors hissed open, and Smits walked out, not looking back. The night air was cool, but the day's heat still radiated up from the parking lot. Night jars swooped overhead, hunting the bugs attracted by the solar-powered light poles. Smits stopped to sort his cardboard box and its contents into the recyclers and walked out into the dust toward his truck. Pseudo padded along beside him, and he rested a hand on the dog's head. He said, "I could make a remark about both of us ending up on the scrap heap, but that's a little on the nose. When he had added the storage containers and started turning the old Airstream into a bar, game room, and hangout spot, he hadn't been thinking of it as a full-time occupation. He'd been thinking how great it would be to have a place like the old Rancho Oro Verde fly-in, but for coders instead of hotshot test pilots trying to break the sound barrier. If he fixed it up a little more, he could turn it into a real bar. He'd need screens for watching movies and for gaming, but careful placement could keep them out of his eye line. Having an off-work space to relax, play some games, and watch some movies would be a great way to ease stress for everybody in the company. Plus, it would be a chance to build stronger bonds between team members. These people were trying to save humanity here. They needed downtime, but they needed cohesion and personal support, too. Well, he could still do that. It would just be his job, instead of his part-time hobby. "How's it going?" Tama said. "Hey, anybody in there?" Cameron lifted their head, blinking, and realized their eyes felt like sandpaper. "What? Yeah." They were a little startled to realize it was late afternoon. Several people must be on break, but all around them in the programming pit were heads bent over workstations, deep in concentration. "What's up?" Tama dropped into the rolly chair at the next workstation. "If I didn't know you were neck-deep in code, I'd think you were baked. You need to get up, walk around, get a tea or something." "I'm fine. Cameron interrupted himself with a jaw-cracking yawn. Tama probably was right. "I'm just in the zone." Tama glanced around with a slightly theatrical, worried look. "Be careful with how zoned you look. If the the boss, sees you, he's gonna go off." "What, and put me in solitary confinement? That sounds great right about now," Cameron said, continuing Tama's prison metaphor. They looked down at their blue polo shirt and gray pants, wrinkled and sweaty, because Cameron had been hunching over their workstation and sitting with their legs folded up in their chair. Trey Lowell's insistence on a company uniform was irritating, only partly because Cameron had a whole closet full of stylish, comfortable clothes they'd rather be wearing. Cameron had been accidentally misgendered at DevLok more times because of these stupid polo shirts than they had for the entire rest of their life so far. But they really needed this job, this opportunity. They frowned at Tama, a little paranoid. "You don't think he'd really fire me because I look messy? I've been here since 5 a.m., and I'm a coder. Nobody sees us but other coders, and we don't care." "Mr. Appearances are worth more than substance." Tama was one of those guys who never sounded serious, but Cameron caught an edge under his banter. "I saw him fire a lady in admin because she spilled a cranberry juice on her stupid polo. Stephanie was pissed, but Trey wouldn't rehire her." Cameron tugged at their own stupid polo. Maybe they should go to the restroom and try to use the hand dryer on the sweaty patches. Rules were rules, and you weren't supposed to have drinks at your workstation. But when you worked hours this long, it was hard not to have something, just to keep yourself awake and hydrated. And it seemed like Trey had gotten worse about this kind of thing since the third partner had gone on medical leave, and especially since he had resigned last month. "That's not right." "Sure as shit isn't." Tama glanced around, his nonchalant expression at odds with the real annoyance in his voice. "I didn't bust my big butt in college all those years to get treated like an inmate." He shook it off with an impatient gesture. "Anyway, I wiggled out from between the cell bars to see if you finished your section." "Oh, right, I did. Just got distracted before I could load it." Cameron turned back to their screen, forgetting Tama's extended prison metaphor and the chance of being fired for the stupid polo. "I had an idea on the depth algorithms." The group had written reams of code for all the different types of excavation that were going to be necessary for a Mars habitat. One of the AI's most important tasks would be to determine the composition of the ground and the level of force it needed to penetrate and shape it. They had a solution in place, but Stephanie thought it was long and clunky, that it could be far more efficient if they gave the AI more options and a better facility for choosing between them itself without waiting for instructions. After the last programming meeting, Cameron had come up with some new ideas and wanted to try them out. Let's see. Thomas swiveled his chair to look at Cameron's screen, then stopped. Uh-oh, there's Balroth. I'm out of here. He pushed to his feet. Send me a section cam. Right now. Cameron waved their second screen over and hastily finished sending the new section to the group workspace as Tama headed away. And it was probably a good idea to try and clean up before they got focused on their new idea again. Cameron pushed to their feet, tugging the polo back into place. They heard a laugh, light and delighted, and looked up just in time to see Balroth leading a young woman in a bright gold headscarf off the balcony above the programmer's pit. The laugh was like a breath of clean, fresh air in the tense atmosphere. Must be new, Cameron thought wryly, and headed for the bathroom. Document Draft 1. Letter for Trey. Treating admin staff as servants rather than employees. Over-controlling. Too much emphasis on rules, which stifles the coder's creativity. Too worried about appearance of company/staff. Building, what people are wearing, what's on their desks, and not who's pulling the most weight and doing the best work. Too much insistence on his vision and not open to new ideas. Not willing to entertain that he might be wrong about anything. Sexist, though not to the openly horn dog point where he's not safe to be around, but the people on staff don't know that, so it creates anxiety. What's this? Lakshmi said, staring at the screen in Stephanie's office. I'm going to write Trey a letter, Stephanie explained. That's my outline. How formal do you think it should be? I'm not sure about the salutation or if I should end it, yours sincerely or what? Lakshmi, sitting across the desk from her and nursing a kombucha, was confused, but then it had been a long day. Working compliance was a grind for her, and it was frustrating that Trey wouldn't agree to move her into programming. He kept suggesting busy work side projects for her, as if she needed to prove she could code. But she was drowning in paperwork and had no time to do anything else. She tried to clarify. You mean an email? She wasn't sure why Stephanie was announcing that, like it was some momentous decision. And she wasn't sure this brand of kombucha had been a good choice. It felt like it was doing something odd to her digestive system. No. Well, yes. It'll be in an email, but it's a formal letter. Stephanie was serious. It'll outline all the problems with his behavior, so we can address those problems for the good of the company. Lakshmi frowned slowly. The list was a pretty accurate summation of Trey's worst issues. Everybody had problems with Trey. At first, Lakshmi had thought it was just her, being frustrated with being forced into a job that didn't use her skills. But her suspicion was growing that Trey was keeping her there because he didn't want her to have any real input in the project. She would take that more personally, except that she thought he didn't want anybody to have any real input into the project except him. His reaction when Smits had resigned was proof enough of that. What exactly are you going to say to him? I'm not going to say it. That would be too confrontational, obviously. Stephanie sounded completely certain of herself, but then projecting confidence was one of her major talents. She snorted and added, And anyway, I think he's physically incapable of listening to me. So a letter will get my points across in an adult manner, like a contract. He understands contracts. Lakshmi wasn't a personnel expert, but this sounded a little dubious to her. But Stephanie and Trey were both terrible with confrontations. Or, actually, they were both great with confrontations. It was not having confrontations they were bad at. Lakshmi would much rather have issues outlined to her in writing, plain and easy to understand, without yelling and confused emotions. So, what exactly are you going to write? Here's my rough draft. Stephanie handed her a printout. Lakshmi set the bad kombucha aside and read. The draft included all the bullet points from the outline, pretty much as they were phrased on the screen. For something that was supposed to be non-confrontational, it seemed pretty confrontational. She had been expecting more the kind of language that an HR report would use, like, could use improvement with employee relations. This seemed pretty blunt, even to her. Well, I agree with everything here, but it's a little in your face, isn't it? You think? Stephanie took it back, frowning. She looked over the page. It's a rough draft, and I thought it needed to be blunt. I think your points are all valid. Maybe you just need to polish it a little, Lakshmi said. She wasn't sure if she was the right person to ask about this. She was terrible at talking about feelings and being diplomatic. Or get someone else to read it. When were you going to give it to him? When he gets back from his trip. Lakshmi was looking forward to Trey's trip. When Trey was away from the office, the atmosphere was more relaxed. She didn't have to deal with finding people crying in the bathroom, and she didn't have to listen to his empty promises about moving her into the coding section. If this works, maybe I should write him a letter too, she thought wryly. Noor had finished up her HR forms and gotten a quick tour from Bharath, and was now on her way out of the DevLok building. Her official start date wasn't until Monday, and she wanted to finish getting her things moved into her new apartment and unpacked. As she crossed the lobby, she saw Trey near the reception desk. He had an expensive laptop bag slung over his shoulder and was clearly getting ready to leave. He gave her a broad, professional grin. Got everything squared away? Yes, I'm looking forward to Monday, Noor smiled back. Trey clearly thought Noor was far more impressed by and attracted to him than she was. The attraction part of that equation was a 0, but she was somewhat impressed, though probably not for the reasons Trey thought. Noor had only been here part of the morning, and she could already tell that DevLok was a powder keg of tension, and not just because of the urgent need to make the Mars colony a reality. Working here was going to be interesting, at the very least. Need a ride? Trey asked, his voice dropping from professional down into something just a tad more intimate. My car should be here in a minute. Oh, thank you, but... The shuttle saved the day by pulling up to the automatic doors. I'm just going to take the bus. See you Monday. Noor waved and sailed out through the gauntlet of outdoor heat and dust and into the sanctuary of the waiting bus. She dropped into the seat and managed not to burst out laughing. Cameron was actually enjoying the afternoon at work. Trey had flown off to a meeting somewhere, and Bharath was in his office, so it made for a much more relaxed atmosphere in the pit. Nobody quite dared to have a drink at their workstation, but you could get up and wander off to the break room and stop to chat on the way back without feeling like the eye of Sauron was watching you. Stephanie was in the building, but everyone knew she didn't like Trey's rules, and she didn't like the way he treated the staff, from the admin people to the janitorial crew. Tom had switched workstations for the afternoon to be next to Cameron so they could finish up their sections. It had gone so well they had finished ahead of schedule, which gave Cameron time to work on their new option code. Tama stood up, stretched, and said, You going to game night? Yeah, I think I might. Cameron sent the new code to the group sandbox so they could check it for load errors. Maybe that new person Trey hired will be there, the sociologist, Tama said. She's real cute. Cameron sat back, frowning up at him. Trey hired a sociologist? Are you joking? Guys, people, Emilio corrected himself as he stood up from his station on the other side of the pit. He sounded frustrated and mildly pissed off. When you schedule a test, you need to let the rest of us know. That's just basic courtesy. Cameron had no idea what he was talking about. Right, that's why we always let you know when we schedule a test. With an impatient grimace, Emilio looked down at his screen. This isn't you? It's got your ID. What are you talking about? Tama waved his screen over to show the test console. His face went still. Chem, a test just initiated, and it's got your ID on it. What? No. Startled, Cameron shoved their chair closer to see Tama's screen. Are you kidding? I am not kidding. Cameron stared in disbelief. There was a test display active, with Cameron's ID as initiator and a launch countdown. It was baffling. It had to be an error. I didn't initiate a test. The obvious answer occurred to them. Oh shit, is someone spoofing my ID? Tama was already pulling log files and status reports. It's got your workstation number on it. Did you just do an upload a minute ago? Yes, but it was to the sandbox. Cameron knew they hadn't done anything wrong. They were pretty sure they hadn't done anything wrong. Cold dread began to form a tight knot just under their breastbone. They lunged back to their own workstation and checked it. I was looking for load errors. There was no execute routine. Thomas shook his head, scrolling down the log file. I'm seeing initiation commands in here. It's running your code, and it's getting ready to launch. Cameron looked back at their screen, rapidly checking through the upload. This cannot be happening. But it can't be. Emilio walked over, his brow furrowed in growing consternation. Other programmers stood up, staring in their direction. Marcy, AJ, Miko. Emilio said, What are you saying? You didn't initiate a test? Thomas' typing turned frantic. Through gritted teeth, he said, They didn't initiate a test. That's what we've been saying for the past. Cam, I can't cancel this. Cameron waved in the test console and tried to initiate a cancel command. Y3 refused it. Cameron swore and tried again. And again. Oh God, what is it doing? Emilio said, But if you didn't, who did? Tama growled under his breath. Cameron looked up at Emilio. They didn't know what their expression looked like. Probably like someone had just punched them in the gut. They said, Send cancel commands. It's not taking ours. There was an instant of dawning horror. Then Emilio swore and dove for his workstation. Marcy fell back into her seat, pulling up the test console. Still typing, Thomas said, Somebody get Balroth. Get Stephanie. Miko tripped over a chair leg trying to grab a phone, and AJ ran for the door. Cameron keyed in another useless set of cancel commands, just as launch confirmed blinked at the top of the screen. They groaned. No, what are you doing? Thomas sent the view of the launch shed to the big screen. Heads lifted all over the pit just in time to watch the doors open. Y3 lifted off, emerged through the doors, all the lights on the console green as if this was a normal test. Cameron said aloud, Please don't crash into anything. Where the hell is it going? Tama muttered, as Cameron frantically typed overrides. Other programmers stood behind Cameron and Tama now, staring in dismay. Balroth sprinted across the front of the pit. Maybe it's heading for the location for Test 7, Miko said from her workstation. I'm looking at the destination set, and it's still the same longitude and latitude. That's the mesa, right? The big screen split as someone put up views for Y3's status and camera. Across the room, Cameron heard Balroth shouting at someone to get the observer drones in the air and notify the Air Force. The point-of-view camera showed cloudy blue sky and glimpses of the dry, rocky landscape below. The onboard mic picked up the rush of wind. From the directional status, Miko was right. It was flying toward the mesa, the site of Test 7. There has to be something. In-flight override, Cameron said, already typing. Just please don't let this thing slam into a cliff. Try. On it, Tama muttered from the other workstation. I've been trying that. It's not working, Marcy said grimly. Cameron tried another override and heard Balroth behind them saying, Yes, we tried that. A power cut didn't work. It's refusing connections, using that signal protection setting. The camera view showed Y3 landing at the mesa, and Cameron felt a painful spike of relief. Maybe it would shut down on its own now. They leaned forward, reading the status updates with desperate hope. No, it was extruding something. Maybe it was repeating the last test. That would give them time to... A loud crack made Cameron flinch, their already strained nerves nearly propelling them right out of the chair. It had come from Y3's mic. Data scrolled over the big screen, but all Cameron could see on the camera view was a dust cloud. Then the wind cleared, and they saw a small crater, streaked with the gray material Y3 used for building. It had just blown a crater in the mesa. Sick horror clogged Cameron's throat. "Oh, shit," someone whispered. Gasps, murmurs of dismay, and swearing came from all around Cameron, but all they could do was sit there, frozen. Then Y3 moved sideways, and another explosion rattled the pit. Airborne debris flew through the air. Cameron flinched, feeling the impact in their bones. "Calm down." Stephanie slid into place next to Cameron, dropping into the chair someone shoved under her. Her voice was tense but even, utterly focused, like a doctor in an emergency room. "Show me what you did." Their hands trembling, Cameron pulled up the screens with their new code and the documentation. Stephanie leaned forward and started to scroll through, biting her lip, brow furrowed as she concentrated. "It's an adjustment to the AI's ability to select options," Cameron explained, hearing their voice sound weirdly distant, like it belonged to another person. "I was trying to allow it to skip the checks that—" "Got it," Stephanie said. "Be quiet now." Cameron swallowed back the urge to babble explanations, excuses, or possibly just whimper. There was no launch command in their new code. It wasn't supposed to do this. There was nothing to make it do this. They could hear Baroth standing right behind them now, breathing hard. The rest of the pit had gone silent. More explosions came from the mesa, muted now that someone had adjusted the volume. "It's destroying an entire ecosystem," Cameron thought, and almost gagged. Tama pushed a wastebasket into their lap, and Cameron clutched it like a life preserver. "It's open-ended." Stephanie sat up suddenly and started to type. "You didn't close off this command line." Cameron whispered. "I didn't. Oh shit, I didn't." Tama clapped a hand over his eyes and moaned. Stephanie continued. "It won't take cancels or overrides, so we're going to try a new upload of the corrected code. Okay, that should do it." She pushed the keyboard back over to Cameron, who dropped the wastebasket and grabbed for it. "Put your ID in and send it." Cameron typed rapidly, grinding their jaw in anxiety, willing Y3 to take the update. On the last keystroke, they stared up at the big screen and stopped breathing. The moment stretched painfully. Then the status update blinked, accept. The scrolling status reports changed as Y3 shifted into a power-down sequence. There was no cheering, just groans of relief. Cameron leaned back in their seat and slid down, wishing they could slide through the floor to the bedrock underneath the building and be buried forever. Tama rubbed his face. Marcy was fanning Baroth with a file folder. His face was suffused, and he looked like he might be on the verge of a stroke. Stephanie pushed to her feet and scrubbed a hand through her hair. Still calm and brisk, she said, "Right. We are going to need an analysis of what happened here, and we're going to need to get the team out to the mesa to retrieve Y3. And I need to get a look at the damage. Cameron, I'm assuming you need to take a minute to calm down, but make it quick, then join me in my office." Cameron managed a nod, but Stephanie had already walked away. Baroth dug a handkerchief out of his pocket, wiped his face, and then followed her. The pit was silent, all eyes on Cameron. Tama slumped in his chair. "Trey is going to kill you." "For real," Miko agreed. She made a stabbing motion. "With a knife." Cameron took a deep, shuddering breath, then scrambled out of their chair and ran for the restroom. Cameron's perception of time was skewed by shock, so they weren't sure how much later in the afternoon it was when they boarded a helicopter on the DevLok pad with Baroth and Lakshmi. Cameron had known Stephanie was going out with a group to view the damage, but hadn't thought they would be included. They had thought they would be staying in the office to help with the error analysis, but Stephanie had told them to come along. Back in the office, Cameron had sat at a workstation with Bharath and gone over the code with him, while Stephanie and Lakshmi had various uneasy phone conversations with everybody from the Air Force to the county sheriff's department. It was tense, but calm. And then Trey had called. Stephanie had been walking with the phone into another office, but Cameron had heard her say, "Did you get my message? What letter? Trey, we'll talk about that later. There's been an... No, later. Fucking shut up and listen to me." After that, it had just been a lot of muffled yelling through the glass wall. Out on the helicopter pad, the wind from the rotating blades blasted the rising heat away. Stephanie and 2 military people Cameron didn't know had already boarded and were getting settled into the row right behind the pilots. No one had offered to introduce them, and Cameron was glad. They were half expecting to be taken off to jail or federal prison at any moment, so any opportunity to maintain a low profile was welcome. As Cameron sat down, one of the military people asked a question, and Stephanie replied, "Yes, the retrieval team is on site." Maybe Y3 would already be on its way back by the time they arrived. Cameron felt a stupid little spike of relief that maybe they didn't have to look at Y3. It was as much their victim here as the poor Mesa. With the others, Cameron got strapped in and put the headset on. The comm was active, and Stephanie was speaking with the pilot and the military people, but nobody in the back was attempting to make small talk. Bharath's face was grim, and Lakshmi's brow was set in a permanent furrow. The copter rose into the air, and Cameron's stomach did a little flip. A pocket between the seats held airsick bags, and Cameron dug one out to hold in their lap. Bharath saw it and gave them an incredulous look, as if Cameron barfing in front of him in the helicopter would be the absolute pinnacle of the fantastic day he was having. After a few excruciating minutes, the headset clicked on and the pilot's voice said, "Here we are." Cold with dread, Cameron looked out the window. They almost said, "Where's the Mesa?" because nothing they were looking at was recognizable. It was a jumble of shapes and rock and dust. It was like something from a war movie. The entire top of the Mesa had been pulverized into chunks, riddled with craters, like somebody had poked it full of holes and then twisted it. Because somebody did, Cameron thought bleakly. The dust was still settling. Whatever vegetation had been here was just gone, wiped away by the force of the explosions. The retrieval team climbed over shattered boulders and piles of rocky debris, their drones circling above them. It was complete destruction. Then Cameron spotted the retrieval team's helicopter and the large container it was lowering toward the people waiting on the ground. They realized the bowl-shaped depression beneath it was a crater, and that gleam of metal was Y3 at the bottom. Up front, someone said, "The drone cams didn't do it justice." On the headset, Bharath said, "Thank God it wasn't the town." Cameron's active imagination supplied an image of what that might look like. They grabbed the airsick bag as their stomach turned over. When they got back to DevLok, Trey was waiting in the lobby. Lakshmi had just dry swallowed a pain reliever when Stephanie slammed into her office. She flinched and then relaxed with relief that it wasn't Trey. And that struck her as so wrong that during a tense emergency that could have devastated the company, people were scurrying through the corridors, hiding from Trey. They were more afraid of being fired than they were worried about the massive damage their AI had caused. Stephanie was breathing hard, furious. She said, "I don't know why I ever thought I could work with him." Lakshmi didn't either, frankly. She said, "I understood why he was yelling at Cameron, but why was he yelling at you?" "He read my letter." Stephanie's expression was coldly furious. "He wouldn't even discuss it with me. He was ridiculing me. Again." "Now? He's worried about your letter now?" Lakshmi rubbed her face in exasperation. She didn't even know where to start. Confronting Stephanie about her letter seemed a stupid choice on the day when a coding accident with the AI had destroyed a chunk of the surrounding landscape. Wasn't it obvious that there were more important things to do right now than worry about personality conflicts? That's ridiculous. Our AI just destroyed a mesa. It isn't our AI, it's his AI, Stephanie said, her jaw tight. Nothing I've done matters. It's all him. She dropped into a chair. He wouldn't even talk about Cameron's coding error. We have to figure out exactly what happened. I'm the one who corrected it, and I'm not even sure that it was what caused the... She made a frustrated gesture. The incident. Lakshmi shook her head in disbelief. I can't even... If there are other coding issues that contributed to the problem, if it wasn't just Cameron's mistake, it could happen again at any moment. Yes, exactly. And it's all wrong, Lakshmi. Trey's approach is wrong. It's been obvious for a while, and it was even more obvious when I went over Cameron's code. There's a better way to do this, but he won't listen to me. Lakshmi let a breath out, pushing her keyboard away. She was sick and tired of Trey. Of course he won't listen to you. He won't listen to me. He wouldn't listen to Smits. He wants to do this alone. He wants his name on the project and in the history books, and he doesn't care about anything else. He won't admit he's wrong until the whole thing fails. But it'll be too late for the rest of us by then. Lakshmi threw her hands in the air. Maybe too late for Earth. But he'll be Trey Lowell, the man whose ego prevented us from getting to Mars. Maybe that will finally be enough attention for him. Stephanie was watching her thoughtfully. You think we could do better without him? Lakshmi didn't see any reason not to say it. I do. Stephanie nodded. She said, Maybe we should talk about that. Cameron stumbled into the moonshot, hating the fact that they needed to take off their sunglasses to see in the dark, cool space. They knew their eyes were bruised and bloodshot, and no one was going to think it was a hangover this early in the afternoon. They might as well be wearing a sign that said, I have been sobbing in the bathroom. There were a few people over in the gaming area, sorting out card decks around an elaborate game setup that was taking up most of a long table. They looked up as the door swung shut. They all shifted uneasily, avoided eye contact with Cameron, and went back to their preparations like someone had rung a leper bell. Cameron went to an empty table on the far side of the room and dropped into a chair. They didn't even know why they had come here. Playing games and socializing seemed like things from another lifetime. Things only people who didn't destroy entire mesas got to do. Terrible people who were shit at their very important jobs and did terrible things went home to their empty apartments and huddled in the dark. Well, Cameron would do that in a minute. Mostly right now, they just wanted to sit here until their headache eased up enough to make the light and heat outside bearable. They didn't see Smits, but Pseudo paced up to them and stared. Someone had added a screen attachment to the dog's collar, but it was blank right now. Cameron wasn't sure if the dog was set up with a mic, but it seemed expectant, so they said, I just wanted to sit down for a little while. I hope that's okay. The dog barked in acknowledgement and trotted away. Cameron slumped on the table and rubbed their face. After the helicopter trip to view the scene of the crime, they had gotten back to DevLok to find Trey there. That was when the humiliation portion of the day had started. Cameron had been raked over the coals at high volume. They were an idiot who didn't understand the basics of coding, a waste of space who didn't understand the importance of details, a danger to themselves, a danger to the project, a danger to others. Cameron had expected to be fired, but he hadn't fired them. Because he knows he needs you, a voice whispered from the shreds of Cameron's ego. He can't afford to lose you. Cameron wasn't sure that was true. Maybe Trey would fire them tomorrow. Maybe Cameron would prefer to be fired because it would make the guilt easier to live with. Moving slowly and deliberately, Pseudo returned with a glass of ice water balanced on its head. Oh, Thank you, Cameron said, pathetically grateful. By the time they found some aspirin in their bag and took it, Cameron felt guilty for accepting the kindness. Maybe Smits hadn't heard yet what had happened and didn't realize his robot dog had offered water to an environment-destroying monster. The door opened, and everyone, including Cameron, glanced up, expecting more people coming to play the massive fantasy game taking shape on the table. But it was Stephanie standing in the doorway. Cameron cringed. Stephanie hadn't yelled at them, had remained calm throughout the whole horrible incident. She had dealt with all the concerned authorities, from the county sheriff's department to the state government to the National Earthquake Service to the Air Force and the Army, all wanting to know just what had happened on the mesa. She hadn't raised her voice until Trey had called and disrupted their mostly calm triage of the situation. Stephanie's pantsuit was dusty and she looked tired and sweaty. She glanced around the bar. The game players looked from her to Cameron, uneasy but avidly curious. Then Stephanie spotted Cameron, came over, and sat down across from them. She said, "Are you all right?" That was the last question Cameron had been expecting, and they were startled. "No. Well, yes." Cameron waved their hands helplessly. Saying they felt like they had abrogated their right to any kind of consideration ever for the rest of their life was overdramatic and self-pitying, even if it was true. "I'm fine." Stephanie's expression said she found that difficult to believe. Pseudo trotted up and stared expectantly. Stephanie glanced at it, bemused, and Cameron said, "It brought me a water. I think it has a mic so you can ask it for drinks now." "Huh, that's neat. I'd like a beer, please," Stephanie told the dog. It trotted off, and Stephanie regarded Cameron. Nervous, Cameron looked away, braced for something. Maybe Stephanie was about to fire them. Maybe she had talked it over with Trey. But Stephanie said, "I heard how hard Trey was on you. I thought it was uncalled for." Cameron was floored, and it took them a moment to respond. "No, I mean, I deserve to be fired. I deserve to be in jail, and I'm not, so everything is great." They took a sharp breath, but the words still stuck in their throat. "I'm going to turn in my resignation. I've already written it. I just needed a break before I handed it in." Stephanie shook her head, her mouth set in a grim line. "Did Trey tell you to resign?" No, he didn't, but..." Trey had said a lot of things that had left bleeding wounds across Cameron's psyche, but he hadn't said to resign. But if Trey believed everything else he had said, then Cameron needed to resign. It was that simple. "I feel like I have to resign. I mean, he probably should have fired me." Stephanie lifted her brows. Pseudo arrived with the beer, already open, its steps slow and careful. Stephanie took it and waited until the dog had padded away before she said, "But he didn't, because he knows DevLok can't afford to lose you." That echoed Cameron's ego-driven wish so exactly that Cameron almost laughed, but the laugh stuck in their throat and turned into an almost sob instead. Taking a gulp of water, Cameron said, "I think that DevLok can't afford to keep me." Stephanie shook her head. "Did you do it on purpose? Did you wake up this morning and think, 'Today I shall destroy a mesa like an angry god'?" Cameron winced. Tama had made a Cameron Destroyer of Worlds joke that hadn't been funny either. "No, it was a horrible mistake." Stephanie nodded. "It was. Do you know why you made the mistake?" Was Stephanie asking for an excuse? Cameron could come up with some excuses if they tried. The long hours, the tension from all of Trey's rules, the sudden firings that made the staff stiff and nervous, Trey's Jekyll and Hyde personality, dehydration from not being able to have a drink or water bottle at their desk. Cameron snorted in sour amusement at the last one. None of it was the truth. They said, "I got overconfident, and it made me careless." They rubbed at the growing puddle of condensation on the table, self-conscious. It was painful and humiliating to admit it, but also, weirdly, a relief. "There's no excuse for it. I got cocky and I screwed up." Stephanie sipped her beer, still watching Cameron with that calm, even gaze. "Why do you feel you were overconfident?" Cameron hesitated. But no, they weren't going to be self-deprecating about their work. It might be the last chance they got to talk to Stephanie like this, and Cameron wanted to be honest and not apologize for things that didn't need apologies. "My work up to this point has been good. Maybe even great." Stephanie wasn't rolling her eyes or anything, and that gave Cameron more confidence. "It has been great. I've been very proud of what I've done, and I think that's a good way to be. You have to have an accurate assessment of your skills and some freedom to be creative, but They shook their head impatiently. "I wasn't in over my head. I think the code I developed will bring Y3 a lot closer to being ready for the trials, but I just got sloppy. I should have gone through it again, followed procedure before I uploaded, and I didn't." Stephanie nodded agreement. "Are you going to make that mistake again?" "No, God, I hope not." Cameron grimaced and felt a cold shudder travel down their spine. Baroth saying, "Thank God it wasn't the town," was burned into their cerebral cortex, and they would never forget it. They admitted, "I'm going to remember this every time I update anything, even if I'm just editing documentation. Every time I touch a screen." Stephanie eyed them. "Does the AI scare you?" Cameron didn't want to admit it, but they had been telling the truth through this whole conversation, and it would be a shame to stop now. They said, "Yes." They thought of the craters, the sounds of those explosions, and felt another chill. "I'm afraid of it." "Good." Stephanie leaned forward, her expression intent. "You should be scared. We should all be scared. The AI has incredible power and incredible potential. Mistakes can be lethal, and I need coders who deeply understand that." She added, "Is that why you want to resign?" Cameron took a sharp breath. "No," they said, and were a little surprised to realize it was true. "I can be afraid of how powerful it is and still want to work with it. That may sound weird, but..." "It doesn't sound weird," Stephanie said, and her expression was so serious Cameron believed her. "I don't want to lose you over this." Cameron hesitated. Talking to Stephanie like this had brought things into focus, given Cameron some perspective. They were still miserable about what had happened, but they were coming around to the idea that life was going to continue, that the project would continue. And it also brought into focus the different ways that Stephanie and Trey had reacted. Stephanie had walked in like a stone-cold badass and calmly worked the problem until she solved it. Would Trey have been able to do that if he'd been in the building? Or would he have been too busy yelling at Cameron to handle the emergency? Stephanie had used Cameron's monumentally terrible fuck-up as a way to teach them to be a better coder, to teach them to have a healthy respect for what they were working with. Cameron had never liked Trey, but they had had a lot of respect for his ability. But coding wasn't everything in a project like this. What if somebody else made a mistake with the AI and Stephanie wasn't there? Trey went off on people all the time for reasons Cameron thought were petty and dumb. How was he going to handle it if the AI didn't do what he wanted it to? Cameron said, "I don't think I can work with Trey." They were a little surprised the words had come out of their mouth, but now that they were out there, Cameron knew they were true. Cameron could work with a potentially dangerous AI. Their respect for its terrifying power was more than healthy, but Cameron couldn't work with a guy who they didn't trust with such a dangerous AI. Stephanie leaned back in her chair, her expression opaque. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." Watching Stephanie and Cameron from the Airstream's inner doorway, Smits was more certain than ever that opening a bar was a good idea. Whatever was coming, People were going to need a sympathetic place to get a drink.
You're listening to Machina, narrated by Natalie Naudis. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm. Listen away. Machina is written by Fran Wilde, Malka Older, and Curtis C. Chen. Produced by Marco Palmieri. Executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.